Hello and welcome to the Hypertrophy Odyssey, chapter 393. It is the third day of the week, aka the Spirit Bomb workout. I am feeling very good right now. Very excited for this workout. But anyways, to the main subject matter for today. Everything is pro wrestling. So the main reason why I wanted to discuss this is because there was a comment left on a video right here, this video, and this comment about how everything is pro wrestling. And I'll give a shout out to the commenter because he leaves some good comments. Shout out to you. There you go. But I wanted to say that this statement is very accurate, particularly because if you know anything about pro wrestling, the more you look into other avenues of life, whether it be television, movies, or even the government, you can see how things just become pro wrestling in a weird way. It's a very strange archetype that ends up becoming the whole center stage. Now, sure, wrestling is basically a storytelling, right? That's at the end of the day, it's an essence of how things are going, right? But I think that people forget the basics of wrestling really mirror a lot of the assets or things that are happening in the real world, not even just the real world, but also you see in workplaces or in online discussions or things like that, where there are certain roles that are played by each side, one or the other, and it's almost like a dance, but not necessarily fully. But in the wrestling ring, it's an interesting thing because in there, it's two people telling a story, but these two people are crafting it together. They are having matches together. But obviously, it's not necessarily unscripted, but there can be unscripted moments, things that go a little off the rails, off the wall, all of a sudden planned, So in today's episode, we'll be going to look at that, particularly how you can expand it, because you can see this. Once you start seeing it through that lens, you see how much stuff is just wrestling, really, and how much of it is like, okay, who's behind it? That entire idea. But before we get into that, I want to say this, and this is for those who don't watch wrestling, just a quick little summary of terms I'm going to use, because I think that simplifying that for certain people will make things a little bit easier in the voiceover. So, first term, babyface, good guy, heel, bad guy. And then finally, booker is the guy who's controlling the company and or booking the matches themselves between the babyface and the heel. So that's just an example. If you want wrestling examples, to give you concrete wrestling examples, babyface, John Cena, heel, CM Punk. If you want me to go a little bit different, a little bit more classic, babyface, Hulk Hogan, heel, the Shark, Earthquake. You get the idea. You understand inherently, if you've watched any amount of wrestling, who's a good guy, who's a bad guy. Now, there are in-betweeners, but maybe we'll talk about that a little later. I think that is something that we'll have to discuss later. But for now, those are the three terminologies that you need to know before we can proceed into the idea that wrestling is basically, everything is wrestling. So, with that being said, I will see you at Mother Base.
All right, so started this day off with 80 press, which is pretty good. But anyways, back to the main subject matter at hand. Everything is wrestling. So the main reason why I want to discuss this is because of that picture. Because of that comment, which is very true, and it's a very accurate description. But there is something I need to describe, which I completely forgot to at the first part, which is the idea of what is a work and what is a shoot. In wrestling terms, a work is something that is scripted or part of the storyline. A shoot is something that happens off script, something for real, if you will, something that goes awry in the plan that they've laid out. So the main reason why I wanted to discuss this is so that I can use wrestling terms in future videos. But the thing is, realistically, all of it's a stage. Every single type of thing that you are into is probably a stage for someone. The person behind the scenes that's pulling the strings, that is making the money wherever they want to. And that's the thing. You can see this in geopolitics, shows, television, YouTube channels, anything that involves a person. Usually, more likely than not, they will make themselves the baby face, do things in order to make themselves be the best person and make everyone or or somebody else the bad guy, the heel. Very rarely will it be the other way around. Well, they're the heel, being the asshole, but it does happen. That is sometimes a work. They will pretend to be the asshole heel in order to, rage bait and justify people to be angry at the person. So this happens a lot as well, but it is a divisive and also possible bad marketing move depending on the person. Sometimes people can be assholes because they're naturally assholes, but a lot of the times in wrestling, the best bad guys are played by people that are generally good because they somehow know how to be an asshole. It's a very interesting dynamic. It's all just storytelling to buy and sell merchandise, but as well as ideas, whatever your idea is, so it can win within a certain thing. So that's why the entire heel versus babyface dynamic is still something that people will follow even in other realms. It's something that happens. And you'll also see that occasionally the authority figure that comes in, the booker will come in, say something, but leave. But rarely do they ever really get their just desserts unless they understand what they are doing. That was the one good thing about Vince McMahon back in the day when he was going against Stone Cold Steve Austin, was that he would get his own. Like he would be foiled many a times by the good guy. Regardless, he was like the ultimate evil in comparison to someone who was like a tweener, like Stone Cold. Like he was doing dastardly things, but he was going against the system. But nowadays, that type of stuff doesn't even happen anymore. And even in something like geopolitics, we don't even know who the main booker is, or we do know, but we're not allowed to know. That's a different story for a different day. I think that even now, the reason why this came up was because a lot of videos are staged, because you can tell that most videos are now just works. They're not real. No, half the time you have to wonder if they're really for reals, a shoot video. And most of the time you find out it's not real. Somebody made this skit and or God forbid it's AI, which is a whole other can of worms. It's just a thing in order to get people to come and look at whatever your content is, and setting up the fundamentals that have been established in storytelling that wrestling does really well, but do it in a smaller scale for people who don't know that they're basically watching wrestling. It's always interesting to see, because at the end of the day, it's really just about making sure that whoever is booking it and behind the scenes makes money or somehow gets their ideas to win. And that's the main thing that it is. And even looking at something like sports, like where we are supposed to believe that they aren't rigged, which I could believe they weren't for a while, but with the advent of gambling, I highly doubt that sports aren't having certain strings being pulled for them because of how much money is involved with them now. I do believe that the bookies have now become the bookers of sports in general, which is a very, very terrible thing for sports, but that's kind of a different conversation for a different day. At the end of the day, they're all part of one big ass club. And guess what? You're not part of that club. And for them, they're all interconnected. They're all talking to each other, regardless of what platform or whatever thing you're thinking of when I'm talking about this. They're all talking to each other. They're all there for the same thing, whether it be a profit or an ideology in order to win. But they're all on the same team trying to get all the attention that they can. So everything really is wrestling at the end of the day. Also, shout out Lee Dowling for the comment who inspired this video. Mega shout out to you, brother.
And we're back. Welcome to the workout debriefing. Exercise is not filmed, none. Exercise is skipped, also none. Got everything in, thankfully. But anyways, back to the main subject matter for today. Everything is pro wrestling. So the main reason why I wanted to discuss this is, besides the comment that was left in my on one of my videos, besides that, well, that really was the impetus of this. It really is quite surprising that the world is really truly wrestling. It's heels and baby faces clashing together for center stage for us to appreciate and lap up, whilst the booker is the one that makes the money, sets up everything behind the scenes, and never really gets got unless there's competition. But there hasn't been competition in 3 million years, so it all just depends, right? Maybe 3,000 years, but that's a whole other conversation for a whole other day. I think that it's interesting that for some reason now people want to choose to ignore the idea that most things are manufactured now, where there are people behind the scenes pulling all of the strings, making sure that there is a good guy and a bad guy. And sometimes the in-betweener, which is somebody that may have started one way and leaned towards the other way, or that is technically what we are supposed to be. So then that way we can kind of choose whichever way we want to go to. I think that's why a character like Stone Cold Steve Austin was such a good character. See this episode right here, because he represented the common man, which is the more in between, where you do certain things which are dastardly, not necessarily good, but you're also doing it for your own service, which is a good thing, you know? So I think that is kind of a cultural zeitgeist that a lot of that wrestling got right. And then because of that, everything else just kind of mutated off of that. Now, this isn't necessarily applicable like one-to-one. You're not going to get a wrestler to person like translation in your life, of course. That's not how it works. But the general gist of it is truly that there are baby faces, there are heels, and then that they clash all to book the most money. The most people with the most eyes, of course, will get the most money. And it's like that in social media, in the job market, politics, everywhere. You see it. Of course, there are certain waves of people that get popular. Sometimes the baby faces are super popular. Sometimes the heels are super popular. It all just depends. But in reality, they are playing a character. They're characterizing themselves up to play something that in reality might be shades of them, but might not be shades of them. They understand that they're a heel. Hell, even in regular sports, there is the idea of the bad boy team and or the villain team. The New England Patriots for all those years that Tom Brady was on it. The Golden State Warriors when they had KD. Miami Heat when they had LeBron on it. The current Dodgers. You know, there are teams that are seen as the villain and it just happens, or seen as the good guys. Washington Nationals during the 2019 run, you know, or the villains, the Astros in the 2019 run. You know, these things are inherently in everything. But it's interesting to me, mostly because I think that a lot of people don't realize that, yes, although wrestling is, how you say, prescripted, right? It is already destined, right? They already plan it out. There's still an art to it. It's not necessarily that easy of a thing to do. And the other thing is making people care. And I think that at the end of the day, that's the main thing that they got right, and they don't get as right anymore. But making people care to want to see what happens at the end is the end goal of it. And I think that people forget that part, and also the fact that there is an end to it, because eventually feuds end and the people move on to other and different things within the company. So I think that a lesson isn't necessarily translated. So thus you have a perpetual motion of people staying a little too long, and then thus you get your Chris Jerichos of the world, where it's like, all right, brother, it's time to hang him up, homie. No disrespect to him at all, but you know, there's just a time where it's like, all right, dude, you're starting to, it's getting old fast. And you can see this in a lot of stuff in other ways too, like politics with the two people just not working anymore. But with that being said, tell me what you think in the comments section down below. I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions about this one. If you have any parallels that you see in your life to the wrestling world, or how wrestling is kind of the same, or people playing that character up for the cameras or anything like that, please let me know in the comment section down below. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Please share this video with anybody who may or may not like it. I will be back on tomorrow with a new video. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I will see you in the next one. Keep it heavy. Stay safe out there and stay warm. It's cold now. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace!